3 years on from the February 2011 earthquake, over 11,000 aftershocks have occurred in the Canterbury region.
As of April 2014, the Earthquake Commission has reported that 20,380 Christchurch homes remain to be repaired.
7,860 properties have been red zoned.
With a broad spectrum of loss, it is understandable that many residents are struggling to cope. As of April 2013, Pegasus Health reported that 1 in 8 Cantabrians were using antidepressants, the highest rate in the country.
Dr. David Conradson has been studying the social impacts on Christchurch communities following the Canterbury earthquake. He explained how disaster management has shifted from strictly studying geophysical impacts to encompassing social aspects as well.
It's become clear that to really be able to both understand and mitigate the effects of disaster, we need to understand not only the geophysical dimensions of those hazards, but the disaster arises because of the intersection of the geophysical hazard and the vulnerability or resilience of particular communities, so that we need a more holistic perspective, and that's made space for people working in the social domain to begin to play a role in disaster research and mitigation. It's not just about repairing material infrastructure, but there's these complex social and psychological dimensions. Human geographers, sociologists, psychologists, urban planners, bringing their expertise to complement those who are working as geologists, engineers.
Disaster psychologist Dr. Rob Gordon visited Christchurch in March 2013, informing residents why prioritising wellbeing is most important in the third year following a disaster.
This disruption, the tedium, the annoyance, the frustration, and all of these what appear at first sight to be relatively trivial problems are undermining their relationships, their lifestyle. This all accumulates, and by the third year we see people are starting to run out of energy, run out of resilience and optimism. This is the time really we must help people to get it into perspective and to realise they will get through it. Now I think this is why the All Right campaign is a tremendous initiative, because it's actually giving people simple messages to reflect back to say, hey, this is actually what's going on.
A notable campaign that has many Cantabrians talking these days is the All Right campaign.
We made a trip to Canterbury's Community and Public Health Office to discuss All Right with campaign manager Sue Turner and public health specialist Dr. Lucy Day.
So the All Right campaign is a social marketing wellbeing campaign. It was established after the earthquakes as a way of addressing the wellbeing needs of Cantabrians.
While Sue Turner manages the campaign, Dr. Lucy Dye's job is to ensure the quality of the work is kosher and evidence-based.
We know that there will need to be clinical services for acutely, clinically ill people, but what we're interested in is messaging to the broad base.
We kind of direct this campaign to the 80 or 85% of people who will be struggling, because why wouldn't you be struggling in this environment, but who do have the resources to cope.
We ventured to the Restart Mall in central Christchurch to see Cantabrians' reactions to All Right's Terra Compliment messages.
So cute.
What does it say?
You're the bee's knees.
Perfect.
Oh, thanks.
We know from the international evidence that on the recovery graph that there's a heroic phase where we're all very focused on each other and keeping each other safe. There's a honeymoon phase, which we think in this city was around share an idea, outpouring of hope for the future. And then there's this disillusionment phase, which we're in at the moment. What we're committed to in the All Right campaign is getting people through that disillusionment phase and into a better place emotionally and psychologically.
Really clear when we're talking to people about this that the question mark is extremely important. It's not saying, we're not saying, oh, it's all right.
Nothing chills my blood more than when people describe it as the It's All Right campaign. You know, that is the kiss of death. It's not all right for many people. We are in ourselves up and down, and that was really reflected in our first set of advertising, which was, it's all right to feel over it sometimes. It's all right if you're a tad on edge this morning. It's all right to feel proud of how we've coped. Yeah. Because people were telling us, we feel a mixture of things and we feel them over a quite short period of time. I could feel all these things in a day.
Dealing with insurance, dealing with EQC, having to move out of your house, kids having to change school, moving out of your community, all of those kinds of things, hugely stressful. What we're going through, the patterns are repeated in other places.
We're having a totally normal disaster, which is totally unique.
The more we talked, the more we realised how important it was to actually not just make any assumptions at all, that this was going to work for people, that we needed to go and find out what would work for people.
Lots of outside people were trying to get into the space and frame it in particular ways that met their needs. You know, they were, from our perspective as mental health promoters, very weakness-based and deficit-based, and all about framing people as sick, really.
And victims.
And we're not interested in that because we don't think it works.
We decided that this had to be something that was owned by Canterbrians. So we went and did some research with local people, asking how they were doing, but also asking what kinds of things would work.
And the byline is Christchurch has changed a lot and we all see things a little differently, and that's all right. Without that byline, people were like, they said, it could be some wankers in a windowless room in Wellington, they said. But when we put that up, people said, oh, okay, this is ours. So it's really important that the response is consistent with the international evidence, but also totally local. And I think that part of the success of the campaign is that Cantabrians recognise it.
We're kind of digging down into people's own resources and saying, you guys are actually the experts. You know this stuff, you do it all the time. So when something like a disaster happens, some of that stuff can go out the door. You just forget because of all this other stuff that's going on in your head. You forget, oh, that's right, I used to just ring up my friends every so often and just say, how are you doing? Or I used to go for a walk down to the park, you know, but suddenly I'll stop doing that. So it is that whole thing about, you know, people being able to cope with the fact that there are lots of things that you can't control, but what you can have some control over is you.
So, are Cantabrians all right? Our research shows this question does not have one sole answer. 3 years on, the well-being of Cantabrians is diverse and complex.
However, with disaster recovery efforts shifting to encompass social disciplines alongside the geophysical, a broader spectrum of post-disaster needs are being addressed through innovative solutions such as All Right.
As showcased here, the development of the All Right campaign demonstrates that although outsiders and international case studies can assist in recovery efforts, solutions must come from within the community and be tailored to meet the changing needs of the community over time.
So it's really a story about, again, that the social and political dimensions of what happens after a disaster are as significant as the initial geophysical disruption. I hope that if you have a more interdisciplinary input into understanding disasters and developing responses to them, then we might end up with less difficulty and less distress for the people that are affected by disasters.